Jake had spent years grinding away in the city, working long hours at a high-pressure corporate job that left him exhausted and unfulfilled. He had always dreamed of owning a piece of land where he could live freely, away from the suffocating rules and regulations of urban life. No more city ordinances dictating what color he could paint his house. No more homeowners associations, HOAs, breathing down his neck about his lawn or driveway. Just peace, quiet, and autonomy. When he finally saved enough money, he purchased a sprawling 50-acre plot of land in a rural area. It was a dream come true. The property sat on the edge of a dense forest, with rolling hills, a winding creek, and more space than he could have ever imagined. Here, he could build what he wanted, raise animals if he chose, and enjoy nature without interference. Jake wasted no time setting up his new homestead. He erected a small but sturdy cabin, drilled a well, and installed solar panels. He built a workshop for his tools and a garage for his truck. Every day, he woke up to the sounds of birds chirping and the wind rustling through the trees. It was the life he had always envisioned, simple, peaceful, and free. Until the trouble started. It began subtly. A few weeks after moving in, Jake noticed a strange truck parked just outside his property line. The vehicle, an unmarked black pickup, idled there for long periods, its driver seemingly watching him. Whenever Jake approached, the truck would suddenly pull away, disappearing down the country road leading back toward town. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe it was just a local curious about the new guy in town. Or maybe someone lost their way and was using his property as a landmark. But when it happened again, and again, he grew uneasy. One evening, as he sat on his porch sipping a cold beer, he spotted the truck once more. This time, he decided to take action. Grabbing his rifle, he casually walked toward the road, making sure to stay on his land. The truck's engine revved, and before he could get close enough to make out the driver, it sped away in a cloud of dust. Something wasn't right. Someone was watching him, and he intended to find out why. A week later, Jake received a letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, embossed with a gold insignia that read, Sunnyside Lake Homeowners Association. Confused, he tore it open and scanned the contents. Dear Mr. Callahan, it has come to our attention that your property now falls under the jurisdiction of the Sunnyside Lake HOA. As such, you are required to adhere to the community standards and regulations outlined in our governing documents. Please find enclosed a copy of the HOA guidelines, which detail permissible land use, building codes, and community fees. Your first quarterly HOA dues of $500 are due within 30 days. Failure to comply may result in penalties. Jake nearly laughed out loud. This had to be a joke. His land was miles away from the nearest subdivision, and he had specifically purchased it outside any HOA-controlled areas. There was no way he was suddenly part of some overbearing community organization. Fuming, he crumpled the letter and tossed it onto his workbench. Whoever these people were, they had made a mistake, and he was going to make sure they knew it. Jake wasted no time tracking down the HOA's contact information. A quick online search led him to their office in town. The next morning, he walked into the small, pristine building and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge. That would be me, a woman said, stepping forward. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer and pearl necklace. Her sharp eyes appraised Jake as if he were something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. Karen Whitmore, president of the Sunnyside Lake HOA. How can I help you? She asked, though her tone suggested she had no real interest in helping. Jake pulled out the letter and placed it on the counter. There's been a mistake. This says my land is under your HOA, but that's impossible. I bought my property specifically to avoid this kind of thing. Karen glanced at the letter and gave him a tight-lipped smile. Oh, it's no mistake, Mr. Callahan. As of last month, your property is now within our jurisdiction. The county recently approved an expansion of our HOA boundary, and your land falls within it. You'll need to comply with our regulations moving forward. Jake felt his blood pressure rise. I didn't sign up for this. I never agreed to be part of any HOA. Karen's smile didn't waver. It's not about what you agreed to, Mr. Callahan. It's about what the county approved. You'll find that everything is perfectly legal. Jake clenched his fists. We'll see about that. Jake walked out of the HOA office seething. He wasn't about to let some overreaching bureaucrat tell him what he could and couldn't do on his own land. That evening, he pored over his property deed, zoning documents, and county records. Nowhere did it say his land was under HOA jurisdiction. Determined to fight back, he contacted a real estate lawyer to confirm his rights. The attorney, a no-nonsense man named Travis, assured him that if his land had been rezoned without his consent, he had every right to challenge it. The next day, Jake put up a large sign at the entrance of his property, "Private Land, No HOA." He made it clear to anyone watching that he wasn't backing down. But Jake had underestimated just how far Karen and the HOA were willing to go. The battle had only just begun. As the heroes venture deeper into the ruins, they come across a hidden chamber filled with ancient inscriptions. The walls are covered with golden glyphs that shimmer in the dim torchlight. Among them, a large mural depicts a celestial battle between light and darkness. At the center of this mural stands a warrior, strikingly similar to the protagonist. As the team deciphers the inscriptions, they realize that this is a prophecy foretelling a hero who will rise to challenge the darkness that threatens to consume the world. The protagonist is overwhelmed by this revelation. Could they truly be the chosen one? Doubt creeps into their heart, but their allies offer reassurance. The group understands that this knowledge places a tremendous burden on them, but it also provides a path forward. With newfound determination, they prepare for the trials ahead. As they continue their journey, tensions begin to rise among the group. One of their trusted allies starts behaving strangely, withdrawing from conversations and exhibiting suspicious behavior. At first, the protagonist dismisses it as fatigue or fear, but soon, undeniable signs of deceit emerge. Late one night, they catch the traitor sneaking away, carrying a map of their location. After a tense confrontation, the truth is revealed. The traitor has been secretly working for the enemy, feeding them information in exchange for a promise of power and safety. The betrayal cuts deep. The protagonist feels a mixture of anger and sorrow, torn between punishing the traitor and understanding their motivations. The group decides to move forward, but trust is shaken. They can only wonder how much of their journey has been compromised and what dangers lie ahead due to this act of treachery. Moving beyond the ruins, the group reaches a sacred mountain where the next clue to defeating the darkness is said to be hidden. However, before they can proceed, they are confronted by an ancient guardian, a towering mystical being that tests the worthiness of those who seek the sacred knowledge. The challenge is not one of brute strength but of wisdom and heart. The guardian presents them with riddles, illusions, and tests of character. Each member of the group faces their own trial. The protagonist, in particular, must confront their deepest fears and insecurities. Through sheer resilience and the support of their companions, they pass the trials, proving themselves worthy. The guardian bestows upon them a fragment of forgotten knowledge, a key to harnessing the power they will need for the final battle. Armed with their newfound wisdom, the protagonist and their allies embark on a mission to rally support. They travel across the lands, seeking aid from different factions, warriors, mages, and even rogue factions that have their own reasons to fight against the encroaching darkness. However, uniting these groups proves to be a challenge. Old rivalries and deep-seated grudges threaten to derail their efforts. Through diplomacy, courage, and strategic planning, the protagonist manages to unite them under a common cause. The alliances they forge are not perfect, but they are strong enough to stand against the impending threat. With an army at their back, they prepare for the decisive battle that will determine the fate of their world. As the dark forces begin their march, the protagonist and their allies brace themselves for the ultimate confrontation. The sky turns an eerie shade of crimson, signaling the arrival of the enemy's forces. The battlefield is set, and the air is thick with tension. The enemy's leader, a figure of immense power and malevolence, finally reveals themselves, exuding an aura of overwhelming darkness. The protagonist stands at the forefront, aware that this battle will test everything they have learned. The sacrifices made, the hardships endured, all have led to this moment. With a battle cry that echoes through the land, the final war begins, marking the ultimate test of destiny, courage, and sacrifice. As the dust settled from their previous trials, the protagonists found themselves in a moment of clarity. They had long suspected that something crucial was being kept from them, but now, with the scattered clues aligning in their mind, the truth became undeniable. One evening, guided by instinct and an unrelenting pursuit of knowledge, they retraced their steps through the abandoned archives of the ancient library. The air was thick with forgotten whispers and the scent of aged parchment. With each scroll and tome they unearthed, a pattern emerged, stories of a lost lineage, a prophecy woven through centuries, and a name that seemed to follow them like a shadow. When they finally found the document hidden beneath a loose stone in the wall, their hands trembled as they unraveled its contents. The protagonist was not who they had believed themselves to be. Their true lineage was one of forgotten royalty, exiled in secrecy to protect them from forces that feared their rightful claim to power. This revelation shattered everything they had known. The pain of past betrayals suddenly made sense. The enemies they had fought were not after them merely out of convenience but because they posed a direct threat to their dominion. With a heavy heart and newfound determination, the protagonist realized they could no longer walk the path of ignorance. They had a kingdom to reclaim, a destiny to fulfill, and a legacy to honor. No war is won without loss, and no hero rises without heartbreak. Just as the protagonist began to piece together their new purpose, a betrayal from within their trusted circle shattered their trust and momentum. The betrayer was someone they had fought beside, someone they had once considered family. It was an act of deception so deep and personal that it felt like a knife in the gut. The revelation came unexpectedly. One evening, after making plans to gather allies for their cause, the protagonist found themselves in an ambush. Armed enemies surrounded them, their movements coordinated with an intimate knowledge of the protagonist's weaknesses. There was only one way their adversaries could have acquired such information. Someone from within had fed them their secrets. Escaping by the skin of their teeth, the protagonist confronted the traitor under the dim light of a flickering lantern. The look in their eyes was not one of regret, but of conviction. "It was never about you," they said, voice laced with bitterness. "It was about survival. You don't know the whole story." Betrayed, but not broken, the protagonist felt the sting of disillusionment. They had placed their trust in a snake, and it had cost them dearly. Yet, even as they processed the pain, they knew they could not afford to falter. The battle was far from over, and now they had to fight with one less ally and one more enemy. With their forces weakened and their plans in disarray, the protagonist made a bold decision: to infiltrate enemy territory alone. It was a mission born out of necessity, one that held the promise of answers and the risk of certain death. Armed with only their wits and a carefully crafted disguise, they ventured into the heart of darkness. The enemy's stronghold was a labyrinth of corridors and watchful eyes, where every shadow held the potential for discovery. The air was thick with the scent of iron and old stone, the remnants of a history forged in blood. They moved like a ghost, slipping through crevices and stolen moments, eavesdropping on hushed conversations. What they discovered was beyond anything they had imagined. The enemy was not merely after power, they were after something far greater, a lost relic of unimaginable force, capable of reshaping the very fabric of reality. The protagonist knew then that this was not just a battle for the throne, but for the fate of the world itself. Escaping with this newfound knowledge was a feat in itself. Narrowly avoiding capture, they fled under the cover of night, pursued by shadows with sharp blades. The moment they crossed the border back into friendly lands, they knew they could never look at this war the same way again. This was no longer about vengeance or legacy, it was about preventing a catastrophe beyond imagination. The weight of the knowledge they now carried pressed down on the protagonist like an unbearable burden. For the first time since their journey began, they questioned whether they were truly the right person for this fight. The enemy was more powerful than they had ever imagined, their resources endless, their cruelty unfathomable. Who was the protagonist, in comparison to such overwhelming might? They sat alone on a quiet hillside, staring at the horizon, contemplating the cost of their choices. Every sacrifice, every wound, every betrayal, they had endured it all, but at what cost? Was it worth it? Could they truly lead people into a battle that could destroy them all? Then, a voice from the past echoed in their mind. The words of a mentor, long gone but never forgotten: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it." The protagonist realized then that their doubts did not make them weak, they made them human. And it was that humanity that set them apart from their enemies. They had something worth fighting for, not just a throne, but the people who believed in them, who looked to them for hope. With a deep breath and renewed resolve, they rose to their feet. There was no turning back now. The final battle was coming, and they would meet it head-on. With their path set, the protagonist began preparations for the ultimate confrontation. Every ally was called upon, every strategy refined, every resource gathered. The battlefield was chosen carefully, a place where they could maximize their strengths and minimize their enemies' advantages. The air buzzed with the anticipation of war. Soldiers sharpened their blades, mages prepared their incantations, and spies whispered the last pieces of crucial intelligence. The protagonist moved among them, offering words of encouragement, forging bonds that would turn warriors into legends. As the sun set on the eve of battle, they stood before their assembled forces, gazing into the eyes of those who had placed their faith in them. With a voice that carried through the ranks like a war drum, they spoke of honor, of resilience, of the unbreakable will of those who refused to bow to tyranny. The speech was not just words, it was a promise. A promise that they would fight, not just for themselves, but for every soul who had suffered under the enemy's rule. And so, with the dawn of the final day approaching, the protagonist tightened the grip on their weapon. The time had come. This was not just their battle, it was their destiny. And they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The air crackled with tension as the forces of good and evil converged upon the battlefield. The protagonist, having gathered allies from all corners of the realm, stood at the forefront, his resolve unshaken. Across from him, the antagonist loomed, eyes gleaming with malevolent triumph. The battle erupted in a cacophony of clashing swords, whizzing arrows, and the booming incantations of mages. The earth trembled beneath their feet as warriors and beasts alike engaged in the fray. The protagonist, wielding the knowledge and power he had gained throughout his journey, led his allies with precision and courage. Yet, the antagonist was no less formidable. He unleashed dark forces that threatened to consume the battlefield, his laughter echoing like a death knell. The protagonist knew that he had to face him directly if they were to stand a chance. With his heart pounding, he fought his way through the chaos, each step bringing him closer to the final confrontation. As the protagonist and antagonist clashed, the world seemed to hold its breath. Their battle was more than physical, it was a collision of ideals, of the past and the future. The antagonist sneered, his power seemingly limitless, while the protagonist, though battered, fought on with sheer determination. Blow after blow, the fight took its toll. The protagonist's allies suffered losses, their sacrifices staining the battlefield with sorrow. He could feel the weight of every fallen comrade pressing upon him, fueling his resolve. The antagonist, sensing his waning strength, struck a devastating blow, sending the protagonist crashing to the ground. For a moment, all seemed lost. But then, from the depths of despair, the protagonist found a final surge of strength. The lessons he had learned, the bonds he had forged, all culminated in a single, decisive moment. With a final, desperate strike, he landed a blow that shattered the antagonist's dark power, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. As the dust settled, the battlefield lay silent. The antagonist was no more, his dark reign ended. Yet, victory had come at a cost. The land bore the scars of war, and the echoes of loss filled the air. The protagonist stood amidst the ruins, exhaustion threatening to overtake him. His allies, those who remained, gathered around, their faces a mixture of relief and grief. They had won, but the price of peace had been steep. As they tended to the wounded and mourned the fallen, the protagonist felt the weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders. He knew that this was only the beginning of the journey to rebuild. Though the antagonist had been defeated, the world needed healing. And he, along with his allies, would see it through. With the war behind them, the protagonist and his allies turned their focus to rebuilding. Villages were restored, the people slowly finding their way back to a life of peace. The protagonist, now a symbol of hope, worked tirelessly to ensure that the world would never again fall into darkness. The scars of battle remained, both on the land and in their hearts. Yet, through unity and perseverance, they forged a new era. The protagonist, though forever changed by his journey, found solace in the resilience of those around him. Amidst the rebuilding, he took time to honor those who had been lost. Statues and monuments were erected, not to glorify war, but to serve as a reminder of the sacrifices made. The protagonist knew that their memory would live on, guiding future generations toward a brighter path. As the years passed, the world flourished once more. The protagonist, now older and wiser, knew that his time in the spotlight had come to an end. He had fought, suffered, and triumphed, and now it was time to pass the torch. Gathering his closest allies, he spoke of the future, of the need to safeguard the peace they had fought so hard for. With heartfelt goodbyes, He stepped away from the life of a warrior, seeking solace in the quiet corners of the world he had saved. As he gazed upon the rising sun, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. He had done his part, and now, the world belonged to those who would come after him. With a final, contented sigh, he walked away, leaving behind a legacy that would never be forgotten.